From Pacifica, this is Democracy Now!
The fact that today's Supreme Court ruling just coming out, a tremendous success, a tremendous victory for the American people and for our Constitution. This is a great victory for our Constitution.
In a major victory for President Trump, the Supreme Court has upheld his so-called Muslim travel ban. But hours later, a federal judge rules immigration officials must stop separating immigrant children from their parents at the border and must reunite all parents and children within 30 days. We'll get the latest. But first, 28-year-old Democratic socialist Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez pulls off the biggest upset of the year by defeating New York Democratic Congressmember 10-term Joe Crowley in Tuesday's primary here in New York.
This victory belongs to every single grassroots organizer, every working parent, every mom, every member of the LGBTQ community. Every single person is responsible for this.
Then we go to Mexico, where left-leaning presidential candidate Andrés Manuel López Obrador is leading in the polls ahead of Sunday's election. All that and more coming up. Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. In a series of extraordinary legal decisions Tuesday, the Supreme Court has upheld President Trump's so-called Muslim travel ban, while a federal judge in California has ruled immigration officials must stop separating immigrant children from their parents at the border and must reunite all parents and children within 30 days. On Tuesday, the Supreme Court ruled 5-4 to uphold Trump's travel ban, which prohibits people from entering the United States from 5 majority Muslim countries, Iran, Libya, Yemen, Syria, and Somalia, as well as people from North Korea and some government officials from Venezuela. In a scathing dissent, Justice Sonia Sotomayor condemned the ban as harrowing and said it was, quote, motivated by hostility and animus toward the Muslim faith. Sotomayor also said the decision to uphold the ban involved, quote, ignoring the facts, misconstruing our legal precedent, and turning a blind eye to the pain and suffering the proclamation inflicts upon countless families and individuals, many of whom are United States citizens, unquote. After the ruling was announced, protesters gathered outside the Supreme Court to condemn the decision. This is Darshan Raja, founder of Justice for Muslims Collective.
No court decides the parameters of our community's humanity.
Yes.
We will continue to resist. We will continue to fight. And for the American people and for our allies and accomplices, it is also your role to help us overturn the legality of these decisions. We know that they're inhumane. We know that they're racist. We know that they're discriminatory. We cannot allow for these decisions to be upheld. So please, we're asking for your solidarity to stand with us in this particular moment.
That was Darshan Raja, founder of Justice for Muslims Collective, hour after the Supreme Court issued its ruling upholding the Muslim travel ban. Federal Judge Dana Sobrao in San Diego ruled immigration officials must stop separating immigrant children from their parents at the border, and that migrant children already separated must be reunited with their parents. The ruling says all children under the age of 5 must be reunited with their parents within 14 days, and all children 5 and older must be reunited with their parents within 30 days. The ruling does not require the Trump administration to stop prosecuting people for crossing the border. More than 2,000 children remain separated from their parents, jailed in detention centers across the country. Immigration advocates are warning the Trump administration has no clear plan for how to reunite them with their parents, some of whom have already been deported. On Tuesday, hundreds protested Attorney General Jeff Sessions' visit to Los Angeles. 25 protesters, including clergy, were arrested outside a federal courthouse. Sessions was visiting. Young mothers and their children also protested Sessions' speech to the Criminal Justice Foundation's annual luncheon. This is protester Nicole Saburian.
I have an 18-month-old, and imagining these kids separated from their families is just more than anything I can fathom. And it's terrorism, it's torture, and I can't do that much, but I can show up is all that I can do as a mother of a toddler.
We'll have more on these two rulings later in the broadcast. In another important decision on Tuesday, the Supreme Court ruled 5-4, California cannot require so-called crisis pregnancy centers to supply women with information about how to end their pregnancies. The court ruled on behalf of the anti-abortion pregnancy centers on free speech grounds. There are over 2,500 so-called crisis pregnancy centers across the country, including some that are unlicensed. In response to the ruling, the group NARAL Pro-Choice America said, quote, fake women's health centers with the rest of the well-funded and well-connected anti-choice movement have been working towards this moment for decades. They've carefully put the pieces together, passing radical and unconstitutional abortion bans, stacking the lower courts because they're counting on Trump's Supreme Court to overturn Roe v. Wade. Roe is at greater risk than ever before, they said. In Syria, tens of thousands of civilians are fleeing a Syrian government offensive on the southern province of Daraa. The United Nations says 45,000 people have been displaced over the last week. Dozens of civilians have also reportedly been killed. In Yemen, a new report says the U.S.-backed Saudi-led coalition was responsible for more than half of all child deaths last year. The Children in Armed Conflict report says the Saudi-led coalition was responsible for the deaths of at least 370 children last year. The report comes as the U.S.-backed Saudi-led coalition continues its offensive on Yemen's key port city of Hodeidah, which the United Nations has warned will worsen the ongoing humanitarian catastrophe in Yemen. Back in the United States, voters went to the polls for primary elections in 7 states Tuesday: New York, Maryland, Utah, Colorado, Oklahoma, Mississippi, and South Carolina, in a stunning upset and the biggest surprise of the primary election season so far. 28-year-old Puerto Rican Democratic Socialist Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez beat out 10-term incumbent Congressman Joe Crowley in New York. Crowley is the 4th-ranking Democrat who had been regularly floated as a potential Speaker of a Democratic House. He'd outraised Ocasio-Cortez by at least 10-1, yet Ocasio-Cortez defeated Crowley in a stunning upset after running a progressive grassroots campaign advocating for Medicare for all and the abolition of ICE, the Immigration and Customs Enforcement Agency. We'll hear from Ocasio-Cortez right after headlines. Meanwhile, in Maryland, former NAACP President Ben Jealous won the Democratic primary for governor on a progressive platform that includes free college, the legalization of marijuana, and a $15 an hour statewide minimum wage. Jealous will now face Maryland Republican Governor Larry Hogan in November's general election. And in other primary results, Republican Mitt Romney won his Senate primary in Utah. And accused NSA whistleblower Reality Winner has pled guilty to retaining and transmitting a document to a news organization after reaching a deal with the U.S. government to serve a 5-year prison sentence. Reality Winner had faced up to 10 years in prison on charges she violated the Espionage Act by leaking a top-secret document to The Intercept about Russian interference in the 2016 election. She's been in prison for the last year at the Lincoln County Jail in Georgia, where The Intercept reports Winner has been struggling with depression and an eating disorder. To see all our coverage of Reality Winner's case, go to DemocracyNow.org. And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, DemocracyNow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman.
And I'm Juan Gonzalez. Welcome to all of our listeners and viewers around the country and around the world. In a stunning upset and the biggest surprise of the primary season this year, 28-year-old Democratic Socialist Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez has beat out a 10-term incumbent Representative Joe Crowley in New York. Crowley is the 4th-ranking Democrat in the House, and he'd outraised Ocasio-Cortez by a 10-1 margin. Crowley was widely viewed as a possible future House Speaker, yet Ocasio-Cortez defeated him after running a progressive grassroots campaign that advocated Medicare for all and the abolition of ICE, the Immigration and Customs Enforcement Agency.
Just days before the primary, she left New York City to go to Tomeo, Texas, to protest family separation at the border. Nearly 70% of Ocasio-Cortez's campaign funds came from individual contributions under $200. This is Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez reacting to the news of her win live on New York One when she looked up at the TV screen Tuesday night.
She's right here. I can't let you know. She's looking at herself on television right now. How are you feeling? Can you put it into words?
Nope. I cannot put this into words.
All right, your supporters here are very excited for you. This was a grassroots campaign. Can you believe the numbers that you're seeing right now?
I cannot believe these numbers right now, but I do know that every single person here has worked their butt off to change the future of the Bronx and Queens. That's what I know. That's what I know. And that this victory belongs to every single grassroots organizer, every working parent, every mom, every member of the LGBTQ community. Every single person is responsible for this.
That was Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez celebrating her stunning win against Democratic incumbent Representative Joe Crowley. She is the daughter of a Puerto Rican mother and a Bronx-born father. The Intercept reports that she worked as a waitress and bartender after graduation to supplement her mother's income as a house cleaner and bus driver. A viral campaign ad of Ocasio-Cortez's featured her saying, "Women like me aren't supposed to run for office."
It's time to fight for a New York that working families can afford. That's why I'm running for Congress. This race is about people versus money. We've got people, they've got money. It's time we acknowledge that not all Democrats are the same. That a Democrat who takes corporate money, profits off foreclosure, doesn't live here, doesn't send his kids to our schools, doesn't drink our water or breathe our air, cannot possibly represent us. What the Bronx and Queens needs is Medicare for all, tuition-free public college, a federal jobs guarantee, and criminal justice reform. We can do it now. It doesn't take 100 years to do this. It takes political courage. A New York for the many is possible. It's time for one of us.
If Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez defeats Republican candidate Anthony Pappas in November, she will be the youngest person in Congress. We spoke to Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez just before the broadcast. Here she is talking about her historic win earlier this morning.
Thank you, and thank you guys so much for having me.
Can you talk about your response last night? The picture has become iconic when you looked up at the TV screen and saw that you were not only ahead, but far ahead. Talk about your reaction and what is your platform?
Yeah, well, you know, I had not checked the results in that moment. I was not even following them to that room. Honestly, I was so nervous. The ground had felt so great, but I didn't want to underestimate the power of the machine. And so I just saw all these people celebrating, and I ran inside, and apparently I ran right into a camera set, and I looked up at the screen and I saw that, yeah, not only were we ahead, but that we had a double-digit victory, and it was just astounding. It was unbelievable.
So, Alexandria, can you tell us, for many of the viewers and listeners who haven't heard of you, didn't know about your campaign, tell us about the main planks that you campaigned on across the district.
Yes, we ran on an unapologetically progressive campaign that included improved and expanded Medicare for all, a federal jobs guarantee, a Green New Deal, justice for Puerto Rico, the abolishment of ICE, and so much more. And I think that at the end of the day, in our community, in the Bronx and Queens, we have been waiting and we have been wanting a message of economic, social, and racial justice for a very long time.
Joe Crowley, the Democratic Congress member you beat, 10-term Congress member, outspent you by what, 10-1?
Yeah, something like that.
And yet you won. And even on the day before the election, you were down at the border. You were not in your district. Talk about the decision you made then, why you feel that is so important, what's happening there.
Right now, the moral character of the United States is on the line, and we do not have the option or the luxury of time to wait for a response for when it's convenient. I think that we all really need to be occupying every border, every protest, and every passageway, and bearing witness to what is happening, and also fighting for the reunification of every single child separated from their parents.
And I wanted to ask you, Joe Crowley has been a powerful figure in New York City politics now for years, but many political observers were well aware that his district was an overwhelmingly Latino population district, and were wondering when it would result in a change in terms of leadership. Talk about not only the importance of your race for progressives, but also for the Latino community now, because you would become, if elected in November, the 4th Latino congressperson from New York City.
Yeah. Well, I think that it's profoundly important. Our communities, all communities in the United States, deserve representation in Congress, and it wasn't just about having a representative, an ethnic representative, but also having a policy representative. And that's why, I was proud to run a campaign that was, I think, one of the strongest campaigns for advocacy for Puerto Rico and as well as immigration reform. So I think that those voices and those positions are badly needed in Congress today. And I look forward to kind of ushering an era of greater representation and diversity, not just in identity, but also in policy in Congress.
You are, Alexandria, a Democratic Socialist, a member of the Democratic Socialists of America. What does that mean to you? And can you also talk about, having worked for Bernie Sanders, what his campaign has meant and the example you're using?
Absolutely. Well, for me, one of the things that democratic socialism means is that in a modern society where we have the resources and the capacity to ensure that every person can be duly educated, can have access to health care, and that we can afford and have the ability to house people in our economy, that a moral society guarantees a basic level of dignity for people in the United States and America. And that's what that means to me. That's what my values are. As far as the Sanders campaign, I think that what the Sanders campaign and working on the Sanders campaign did for me was that it showed that a grassroots movement is still possible in the United States. And I organized on the Sanders campaign in the Bronx. And in knocking on those doors 2 years ago, I knew that our community was ready for this change. And I believe that, we really needed to have that representation, that dignity, and representation that was not compromised by corporate interests so that we could fully advocate for working families.
And, of course, your victory is a stunner across the country, but also another fellow organizer in the Sanders campaign, Ben Jealous, as you no doubt have heard, also won the primary, Democratic primary in Maryland in the race for governor. Have you heard it all from Ben Jealous at all in the last 12, 13 hours? I have not. That's not to say that they haven't reached out. Honestly, I have 500 text messages in my phone. But I greatly, greatly look forward to a Governor Jealous because it is so badly what we need for our future.
Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, if you are elected to Congress, you will be the youngest woman ever elected. Talk about Mother's Day. Talk about the moment you walked into your opponent's headquarters and challenged him to a debate and what that meant.
Yeah, well, we were being ignored and our campaign was being ignored. But moreover, I had felt like the community badly wanted a debate. The community badly wanted to have the experience of a full democracy and a full primary, which included a robust conversation between both candidates. And so I hadn't even, it wasn't in the plan, but we were knocking doors in the area, and I turned the corner, and my opponent's office was there. And so I just decided to walk in and ask for a debate. And to his credit, he did agree to one on New York One, and we were able to provide that experience and that conversation, not just on television, but ultimately we also had one local community debate in Queens, and it was so lively. And the people here in New York that have not had a primary in 14 years, I think really cherish the opportunity to speak and see their leadership debate right in front of them.
Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, you talked about justice for Puerto Rico. What does that look like?
I think first and foremost, we have to support the Marshall Plan in front of Congress right now for Puerto Rico. We need to ensure that we not just have a sustainable recovery, but a community-led recovery in which all of our resources aren't necessarily just being privatized to the same corporations and Wall Street funders that manufactured the crisis to begin with. I think that what we need to do is re-examine the Act, talk about lifting the merchant marine tax, talk about ending the colonial state of Puerto Rico that has led to the economic, subjugation of the people there and the second-class citizenship of Puerto Ricans in the United States.
I wanted to ask you, you grew up in the Bronx, but when you left after finishing college, you went to work back in your community in early childhood education. Could you talk about your experiences there and how that shaped your view of what federal policy should be when it comes to education?
Well, I think coming from an educational background, we know that early childhood is so formative and critical to the destinies of young children in the South Bronx and any community that is dealing with intergenerational poverty. And so what we know is that not just when we invest in children, but when we invest in the prosperity of their families, so parents aren't working two jobs in order to support their children, and that they're able to really provide for their families in one dignified form of employment. They spend more of that time with their kids. They spend more of that time investing not just in their own families, but also in their own schools. And if we are going to really transform the destinies of children in places like the Bronx, we need to make sure that their parents are taken care of and that their schools are fully funded.
Alexandria, your victory is being called the biggest upset of the Democratic Party this election season. You are rocking this country. What do you say to the Democratic leadership and to President Trump, who tweeted big Trump hater Congressman Joe Crowley, who many expected was going to take Nancy Pelosi's place, just lost his primary election. In other words, he's out. That is a big one that nobody saw happening. Perhaps he should have been nicer and more respectful to his president. Certainly not what you were.
No, and I think, I try not to engage in president tweet talk, but what I will say is that he's probably in more trouble now. So that's as far as that goes. As far as the party, I think that this is a really profound and amazing opportunity for us to really refocus on the needs of working-class Americans and the most vulnerable in the United States, because when we stand up for them, then they will stand up for themselves, and we will all, have a collective power.
Just to clarify, you said that Crowley participated in a debate with you. Across the corporate networks, they're saying that he refused. He didn't show up at a debate. Was that a second debate?
Right. Yeah, he did not show up to the initial debate. There were 3 local community debates. He had skipped the first 2, and after an editorial from the New York Times kind of speaking to that, he did show up to the very last one, maybe a couple days before the election.
We want to thank you very much for being with us. We know you're on a very busy schedule right now. Yeah. What message do you have to candidates around the country and to people in this country, Democrat, Republican, Socialist, Green, Independent, as you come out of this primary victory?
Well, I think that our democracy is opening right now, and that the possibility for any candidate, especially those that are not accepting corporate funds of, frankly, many different parties, there's a great moment in our country right now, and that to keep pushing, even when things seem like such a long shot, to at least stick it through and see it through Election Day, because truly, honestly, anything can happen.
Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, 28-year-old Democratic socialist who beat out 10-term incumbent Congressmember Joe Crowley in New York. This is an upset that has been rocking the country, the biggest upset in this election season. In a moment, we're going to talk about the travel ban, but Linda Sarsour is with us, director of the first Muslim online organizing platform, Empower Change. You supported Alexandria. This is a remarkable moment.
I mean, in light of such horrible news yesterday with the travel ban and the Muslim ban, Alexandria is the hope that we've been waiting for. She is a young woman of color. She's Puerto Rican. She's a socialist, just like me. We are both card-carrying DSA members, and she's pro-Palestine, and she is unapologetic. And the movement right now is elated because this is what you're going to see, Amy, in this election season. It's a new day, a new generation, and Alexandria is what represents us and our values.
And as you were saying before we went on the air, there were many people, even so-called progressives, who didn't give her much of a chance at all of winning against Crowley.
Absolutely, because everybody puts everything into money. She was outraised almost 10-1, and it's not about money. It's about the grassroots organizing. It's about building power on the ground. It's about getting voters who have been ignored and marginalized to the polls, and that's exactly what Alexandria did. She's charismatic, she's young, and she was also very progressive, unapologetically progressive. Tuition-free college, Medicare for all, pro-Palestine, even in the recent Great Return March, putting her voice out there while she was campaigning, not afraid of any opposition that was going to come her way. And that's the new kind of folks that are going to win. So no Democrat is going to hold their seat for too long. And a lot of Alexandrias are coming this 2018 and 2020.
It is truly a remarkable moment. And Joe Crowley, in conceding last night, picked up a guitar and dedicated Born to Run to Alexandria.
Mm-hmm. I mean, look, that was classy. I'm going to give Crowley some props for that. But at the end of the day, you lost, and you didn't think you were going to lose, and you were confident that you were going to win. And the Democratic Party in Queens thought he was going to win, and the country thought he was going to win, but he didn't. And that's why I never underestimate the power of the grassroots movement or the resistance.
If she wins in November, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez will be the youngest ever woman elected to the Congress. Linda Sarsour, stay with us as we talk about the travel ban. This is Democracy Now! We'll be back in a minute.
I got one job, two job, three when I need them. I got 5 roommates in this one studio, but I never really see them. And we all came America trying to get a lap dance from Lady Freedom. But now Lady Liberty is acting like Hillary Banks with a prenup. Man, I was brave, sailing on graves. Don't think I didn't notice those tombstones disguised as waves. I'm no dummy. Here's something funny. You could be an immigrant without risking your lives or crossing these borders with thrifty supplies. All you gotta do is see the world with new eyes. Immigrants, we get the job done. Look how far I come. Look how far I come. Look how far I come. We get the job done. Look how far I come. Look how far I come. Look how far I come. Immigrants, we get the job done.
It's a hard line when you're an import, baby boy, it's hard times. When you ain't sent for braces, feed the belly of the beast with they pitchforks. Rich chores done by the people that get ignored. Ya se armó, ya se despertaron, it's a whole awakening. La alarma ya sonó hace rato.
Immigrants from the Hamilton Mixtape. This is Democracy Now! I'm Amy Goodman with Juan Gonzalez.
Well, in a series of extraordinary legal decisions Tuesday, the Supreme Court has upheld President Trump's so-called Muslim travel ban, and a federal judge in San Diego has ruled immigration officials must stop separating immigrant children from their parents at the border and must reunite all parents and children within 30 days. On Tuesday, the Supreme Court ruled 5-4 to uphold Trump's travel ban, which prohibits people from entering the United States from 5 majority Muslim countries: Iran, Libya, Yemen, Syria, and Somalia, as well as people from North Korea and some government officials from Venezuela.
In a scathing dissent, Justice Sonia Sotomayor condemned the ban as harrowing and said it was, quote, motivated by hostility and animus toward the Muslim faith. She also said the decision to uphold the ban involved, quote, ignoring the facts, misconstruing our legal precedent, and turning a blind eye to the pain and suffering the proclamation inflicts upon countless families and individuals, many of whom are United States citizens, unquote. After the ruling was announced, protesters gathered outside the Supreme Court to condemn the decision. This is Darakshan Raja, founder of Justice for Muslims Collective.
No court decides the parameters of our community's humanity.
Yes.
We will continue to resist. We will continue to fight. And for the American people and for our allies and accomplices, it is also your role to help us overturn the legality of these decisions. We know that they're inhumane. We know that they're racist. We know that they're discriminatory. We cannot allow for these decisions to be upheld. So please, we're asking for your solidarity to stand with us in this particular moment.
That was Darek Shanraja, founder of Justice for Muslims Collective. For more, we're joined by three guests. Linda Sarsour is with us, director of the first Muslim online organizing platform, Empower Change, co-authored a new report titled Window Dressing the Muslim Ban, Reports of Waivers and Mass Denials from Yemeni American Families Stuck in Limbo. That report actually was by CCR and Yale University, by Diala Shamas, our next guest as well. And Lee Gallant, deputy director of the ACLU Immigrants' Rights Project. He argued the first challenge to President Trump's travel ban order. Lee, let's begin with you. You were the first there. What does this Supreme Court ruling mean?
Yeah, it's disappointing. It's not completely unexpected. When the court issued the stay of the lower court's ruling a while back, I think, people were expecting it, but it's still a really bad day. I think the disconnect between the judicial opinion and what most people understand as a matter of common sense, that President Trump was trying to keep Muslims out of the country. I think years from now, people will look back and say, wow, I don't know how this decision came. It's a bad day.
And I wanted to ask you particularly about the dissenting opinion of Justice Sotomayor, who's really carving out a niche for herself as the passionate and eloquent defender of a liberal perspective on the court. She spent minutes reciting all the quotations of President Trump, where he actually clearly said this is a Muslim ban, and yet asked why would the court want to ignore this. I want to read a part of what she said. Taking all the relevant evidence together, a reasonable observer would conclude that the proclamation was driven primarily by anti-Muslim animus rather than by the government's asserted national security justifications. Even before being sworn into office, then candidate Trump stated that, quote, Islam hates us, warned that we're having problems with the Muslims and we're having problems with Muslims coming into the country. He promised to, quote, enact a total and complete shutdown of Muslims entering the United States and instructed one of his advisors to find a, quote, legal way to enact a Muslim ban. Well, the president continued to make similar statements well after his inauguration, as detailed above. Moreover, despite several opportunities to do so, President Trump has never disavowed any of his prior statements about Islam. Instead, he has continued to make remarks that a reasonable observer would view as an unrelenting attack on the Muslim religion and its followers.
Yeah, very strong. I think there's no other way to look at what the president was saying. And that's what's so artificial about the opinion, just saying we're not going to give that any weight and we're just going to sort of have wholesale deference to the administration. The administration hid behind this multi-agency task force they set up, but the outcome was preordained. President Trump set it up to give him the conclusion he wanted. And, I don't see any other way, as Justice Sotomayor said, a reasonable observer could look at what happened from his campaign statements through the third iteration of the travel ban and conclude anything other than he was trying to keep Muslims out of the country.
Linda Sarsour, your response?
I was expecting more of like a partial ban, something. I was expecting like a half, which would have still been a Muslim ban. So I was pretty devastated to see that the Supreme Court upheld the entire ban. But I think what gives me solace is that the Supreme Court could decide what is legal, but they can't decide what is just and is moral. I mean, slavery was legal, Japanese internment was legal in this country, segregation was legal. So for me, I don't put my eggs all in the Supreme Court basket. I think we're going to continue to organize and resist, and in particularly this year around electoral politics, which I don't believe take us all the way to liberation, but do stop some of the hemorrhaging and bleeding on our communities. But the Muslim community is directly impacted, and it is a policy of this administration to separate black and brown families, whether it be at the border or through a travel ban or a Muslim refugee ban. And I think people need to make those connections, that this is part of a large white supremacist agenda that is being implemented point after point. Like, he is literally winning almost on every single issue putting forth. Took health care from us, gave us a tax scam, separating mothers and children at the border, banning Muslims. Like, these are things that he was promising, you know, and right now he's using children as a leverage point to get his $25 billion for the wall. Like, people have to wake up. that we may have a momentum in the resistance, but this administration is winning in the highest courts of this land. And even on the order from San Diego to stop the separation of families and also to reunite families, how is that going to happen? With what tracking system do they have? And in fact, does this administration care about court orders? Do we actually believe that they're going to follow court orders? I don't believe that. So I think we still have to be vigilant in this moment.
I want to bring into this discussion Diala Shamas, staff attorney at the Center for Constitutional Rights, co-author of this new report titled Window Dressing the Muslim Ban, Reports of Waivers and Mass Denials from Yemeni American Families Stuck in Limbo. Justice Stephen Breyer cited the report in his dissent, writing, another report similarly indicates that the U.S. Embassy in Djibouti, which processes visa applications for citizens of Yemen, received instructions to grant waivers only in rare cases of imminent danger, with one consular officer reportedly telling an applicant that even for infants, we would need to see some evidence of a congenital heart defect or another medical issue of that degree of difficulty that would likely lead to the child's developmental harm or death. Talk about this report that CCR did with Yale that came out last week, because the majority said, you know, in severe cases, people will be taken care of and let in.
What the majority did was even worse, actually. Unfortunately, what we're seeing here is the way that the majority handled our report, as well as the litany of other evidence that was before it, whether it was evidence of the Trump administration's animus, anti-Muslim bias, leading up to the issuance of the proclamation, or the litany of evidence that it has since the proclamation went into effect, and that we were all able to prove, when those of us who were observing it, how it was unfolding on the ground, completely ignored that evidence, a significant body of evidence, and relied and deferred entirely to the executive. And ultimately what that means is where we are is, as long as the president can articulate a national security justification, however thin it might be, it will be able to get away with whatever it wants. And it's seeing the highest court of our country essentially fall for this administration's gaslighting is exactly why our team and a team of Yale law students traveled to Djibouti in order to be able to call them out in a studied way based on facts on their misstatements and misrepresentations of the waiver process. The waiver process is one of the many things that the administration has relied on in order to justify what is essentially a Muslim ban. And we were able to show, as many others have also since shown, and consular officers have actually said on the record, that the waiver process is a sham. It is only there in paper. It is only something that the administration has put in the proclamation. But in practice, the way it's being rolled out on the ground in places like Djibouti, it is not actually a process. Everybody's been receiving pro forma mass denials, and the result is, after this yesterday's decision, that families in Djibouti that we met with, that were holding their breath, waiting for a decision from the Supreme Court to reunite with each other after having been separated in many cases for years, are now left with a difficult decision of going back to Yemen, a war-torn country, or being separated indefinitely.
Can you give us the example of a family?
Absolutely. I have just been texting on WhatsApp with a gentleman who is in Alabama, and his wife, Sharifa, is actually in Djibouti with her two youngest children. All four of her children are U.S. citizens, mind you. So she is the wife of a U.S. citizen and the mother of U.S. citizens. She's also 4 months pregnant, or she was 4 months in March. And she was just waiting for what she was hoping was a positive Supreme Court decision to be able to rejoin her husband in Alabama. Her two oldest children have had to come to the U.S. Because she couldn't care for all four of them in her situation in Djibouti. Right now, she doesn't know what to do. She has returned to Yemen because she just couldn't stay in Djibouti. Djibouti is a extremely expensive country, and the conditions there are extremely harsh. And they don't really know what to do as a family anymore. I mean, put yourself in a position when someone is seeking advice of what to do next, and you're talking them through what are extremely painful personal decisions that they have to now make. And all of this is a situation that, although it was predictable, is one that is shocking to be faced with now, especially in light of the indefinite nature of this decision.
Linda, I wanted to ask you, you mentioned Japanese internment as an example of something that was legal but was not just. I want to go back to Sonia Sotomayor, where she referenced it. She said, by quote, by blindly accepting the government's misguided invitation to sanction a discriminatory policy motivated by animosity toward a disfavored group, all in the name of a superficial claim of national security, the court redeploys the same dangerous logic underlying Korematsu and merely replaces one gravely wrong decision with another.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I mean, we are going to look back and be ashamed to live in 2018 and to allow this to happen on our watch. And even right now, this administration is doing one of the biggest investments in building basically children prison camps on military bases in the United States. I don't know, Juan and Amy, what else has to happen? What else does this administration have to do for people to really wake up and understand that we are literally living under fascism? We have an administration who believes that they are above the law, that in fact they have pushed policy after policy outside the bounds of the Constitution. And I don't know what else. I mean, I'm worried that something more terrible could happen and has happened historically in our country. And the American people are sitting back and waiting for that horrible thing to happen. And we are not waiting. We are resisting. In fact, I will be joining hundreds of women on Thursday, engaging in the largest women mass civil disobedience that this country has ever seen, because we're not going to sit back. And rallying and marching under fascism is just not working. And we have to find other ways to kind of up the ante with our activism and make some sacrifices.
And Democracy Now! Will be covering protests on the border tomorrow as part of this national action. Who is Fred Korematsu? Explain the significance of what has happened. I mean, the U.S. acknowledged they were wrong with Japanese internment and turning more than 100,000 Japanese. This man, whose case went to the Supreme Court.
Right. So as I think everyone knows, the Japanese were interned during World War II. The case went to the Supreme Court. The administration then put forward national security justifications. The court accepted them wholesale and allowed the internment. We now know that those justifications were a sham. Chief Justice Roberts said, well, the court of history has shown that that opinion was wrong. But I think the really hard thing is to recognize it in real time. The Chief Justice should have recognized in real time now that this was just as bad, or I don't think we need to make a comparison about which is just as bad, but that this was bad and wrong, and that the national security justifications were a sham, and not wait for the court of history 30 years from now. But I think that's what will happen. The same thing will happen. We'll look back on this decision the same way we look back on Korematsu as wrong.
Mm-hmm. And what happens now in terms of the ban? Now with the court decision, is there any possibility for review or changing of the policy at all?
Well, obviously the administration can always pull back, and Congress could do something. Right now that doesn't look likely. The court cases will continue. We're evaluating our options, but I don't want to sugarcoat it. The decision was bad.
Well, you had that decision yesterday. Then hours after the Supreme Court ruling upholding the Muslim ban, federal judge Dana Sabra in San Diego ruled immigration officials must stop separating immigrant children from their parents at the border, that migrant children already separated must be reunited with their parents. The ruling says all children under the age of 5 must be reunited with their parents within 14 days, and all children 5 and older must be reunited with their parents within 30 days. The ruling does not require the Trump administration to stop prosecuting people for crossing the border. More than 2,000 children remain separated from their parents, jailed in detention centers across the country. Immigration advocates warning the Trump administration has no clear plan for how to reunite them with their parents, some of whom have already been deported. Diallo, what about this? What do you understand this means?
Well, I will, let those who've been intimately involved in the litigation answer that, but I will say that the family separation issue is one that is the same and underlying, that governs the way that this administration has actually been governing, whether it's from the Muslim ban or at the border. And families are being separated, and children should not be held hostages.
So, Lee, what does this practically mean?
Right. So we brought this case a while ago. back in March, even before it sort of became a major issue, because we had been seeing hundreds of children being separated before the administration formally announced the policy. What we said back then is we needed prompt reunification of these children. That was back on May 4th when I argued the case. What I said to the judge this past Friday in an emergency telephone hearing is prompt reunification is no longer good enough. We need a concrete deadline. Fortunately, last night, the judge accepted that. As you said, 30 days for all children, kids under 5, 14 days. The administration does not have a plan. That's why the judge put them under a deadline. The truth is, we don't really care about the weeds, how they do it. They just need to get it done. And my basic feeling is the United States government has so much resources, it's just a question of whether they're going to prioritize it, making it urgent. They can get these 2,000 kids back with their parents if it's a priority, and that's what the judge made it. Said, I don't care how you do it, but get it done. And if the government needs nonprofits to help, there are so many nonprofits and people and volunteers that will help. They can get it done. They need to do it. These little kids that I'm meeting with, they are suffering so badly. 4-year-old kids I just met with asking every night, asking their mother, who they were fortunate enough to get reunited, Mommy, am I going to be taken away again? I mean,
is there any expectation that the Trump administration will appeal this and delay it further?
Yeah, I think that's the big question. I genuinely do not know. We hope they won't. We hope they will say, look, we recognize these little kids are being permanently traumatized and not appeal. But from this administration, I just don't know.
The 4-year-old that you were talking about, the 4-year-old child that you had interviewed, explain what was their circumstance?
This is a mother who fled violence, came here, passed her initial asylum screening, was still detained. Her 4-year-old and 10-year-old were taken away from her for months. Because of the lawsuit, we finally got them reunited. I went to visit them, and the 4-year-old just kept asking his mother, is this a bad man? Is this a bad man? She explained, no, Mr. Galern is here to help us. Finally, at the end, he came over and gave me a big handshake. But the mother told me, every night he asked me, are they going to come and take me away again? And that's what we're hearing, and that's what the medical community predicted would happen.
And what about what's still happening? The stories we're hearing about people saying that they're being threatened if they don't say that they are guilty, culpable, if they don't say this, that their children will be put up for adoption, their children will be taken from them.
Right. There is enormous coercion going. The mothers and fathers are willing to do almost anything to see their children. And that's exactly what the administration's plan was. Stop people from coming over here because the word would get out, you'll lose your children. And if you actually get here, even if you have a legitimate asylum claim, they want you to give it up so that you can see your children again. It's as bad as anything I've ever seen.
And Amy, the administration lied. Trump announced around, we're going to stop separating families, but I have bore witness at LaGuardia Airport. Very late flight after 10 o'clock. I was the day before yesterday at LaGuardia Airport, United Airlines flight that came in with children who were unaccompanied minors under the age of 10, disoriented. They were wearing all the same color hoodie. They were attached to each other. The woman who was with them spoke to them in Spanish, said, don't talk to anyone, keep on walking. We were holding up signs telling them in Spanish that we love them, that we see them. And I recorded them in a very, subtle way because I didn't want to scare them, but this is still happening.
And this is United, who claimed that they were not going to be doing this, right?
Absolutely. And then and to say, the question here, even with these court orders, is who's the watchdog? Who holds these people accountable? How do we actually confirm that these kids get reunited? I don't trust this administration.
And how do we even know what the government said, that they said 500 children have been reunited with their parents?
How do we know that that's even true? I don't even know.
Right. So I think one of the important things is the judge ruled last night, not only did he say reunify all the kids, but he said stop separations going forward. We now have that base from which to work with. If we find out that they are not complying, we will go back to him immediately.
We're going to leave it there, but of course we're going to continue to cover this. And Democracy Now! Will be on the border in Texas tomorrow, broadcasting live on Thursday and Friday. We want to thank Linda Sarsour with Empower Change, Diala Shamas, Center for Constitutional Rights. We'll link to your report that you did with Yale University, and Lee Galern to ACLU Immigrants' Rights Project, who brought both these cases to court. This is Democracy Now! When we come back, we head south because there's another election taking place. It's Sunday in Mexico. Stay with us.
de noche se los llevaron. Policías municipales al narco los entregaron. En presencia de soldados se hicieron que no miraron. A mí no me queda duda, es terrorismo de Estado. 3 niveles de gobierno estaban involucrados con sus narcos militares y el crimen organizado. Masacre de Ayotzinapa, no eres un caso aislado. Masacre de Ayotzinapa, no eres un caso aislado. Ay, si vivos se los llevaron, vivos deben regresar. Sí, si vivos se los llevaron, vivos deben regresar. Ay, vivos deben regresar, dice la voz popular. Si vivos se los llevaron, vivos deben regresar.
Changui pa Ayotzinapa by Changui Mahadero. Here on Democracy Now!, I'm Mimi Goodman with Juan Gonzalez.
We end today's show in Mexico, where left-leaning presidential candidate Andrés Manuel López Obrador appears poised to win Sunday's presidential election. López Obrador, also known as AMLO because of his initials, emerged as the clear frontrunner since jumping into the race. This is the 3rd presidential run for López Obrador, who was the mayor of Mexico City from 2000 to 2005. He has vowed to wean Mexico off U.S. agricultural imports, increase aid for students and the elderly, and consider amnesty for the drug war criminals. He visited Los Angeles in February of last year, holding a rally where he spoke out against Donald Trump's policies.
La actual campaña contra migrantes en este país.
Today's anti-immigrant campaign is not only an economic issue,
sino fundamentalmente,
but fundamentally a political one.
Un grupo está sacando.
A specific group is taking advantage of the rise of nationalistic sentiments that permeates here and throughout the world.
Well, for more, we're joined via Democracy Now! Video stream in Mexico City by Laura Carlson, director of the Mexico City-based America's Policy Program for the Center for International Policy. Talk about the significance of this election, Laura.
This election is without precedence. First of all, it's the largest election in modern Mexican history because there are over 18,000 positions. It turns out it's all of Congress, as well as 8 governorships and the presidency, of course, but all eyes are on the presidency. What's happening is that Mexico is poised for a major shift. It's not a hardcore left, and it's not the firebrand that the U.S. press likes to portray it as. It's a relatively moderate leftist, but it's a significant departure from the neoliberal economic model that has been in place in Mexico and had disastrous results, and from many of the policies that people are simply fed up with. So right now, López Obrador has a lead of between 20 and 30 points in the polls. He's getting up toward 50% of the vote, despite there being a field of 4 candidates. This is unprecedented. It would be the biggest landslide since at least 1994. So there's a feeling of excitement in the air, and there's a lot of people who are depositing their hope for a change in the immediate future on this campaign. But there are a lot of major concerns as well. There's concerns about fraud. We've been monitoring a number of the forms of fraud through a network that was formed, and are getting ready to deploy observers because there's a core part of the establishment, both in the Conservative National Action Party and the ruling Institutional Revolutionary Party, that are unwilling to let go of power, and especially with a left-leaning candidate.
And Laura, one of the unusual aspects of this race is that López Obrador, who has run twice for president, is running not with the party that he ran previously. That party is allied with the conservative PAN, the PRD. He's, in essence, developed a new party or a new alliance, Morena. Could you talk about that and why the PRD, which has historically sort of been the left-wing party in Mexico, entered an alliance with the PAN?
Yes, that's another unprecedented aspect, that a new party that hasn't participated could have taken such a significant lead. The history of the PRD is a sad one. Essentially what happened is it began to make a number of decisions that were much more opportunistic and pragmatic than principled as far as its left-leaning supporters were concerned. And that's how it eventually ended up making this odd alliance with the Conservative Party in order to survive politically. But it's been a process that's been going on for a while. There's been an exodus of people from the PRD toward Morena ever since it's formed. And of course, it was formed out of PRD leaders. That's been taking place to the point where there's very little left of the PRD at this point. And the left of Mexico is clearly much more aligned with Morena. This also reflects sentiment that all the parties that had been ruling, but particularly the two conservative parties, had created a huge degree of disillusionment among the people. And yet there's a sense now, since this is a new party, and it's actually called a movement for national regeneration rather than a party, that it could be something different. Because the biggest part of this vote, of this movement for López Obrador, is people being sick of the way things are. They were able to use fear against him as uncertainty, and it worked to a certain degree. But now people are more afraid of the reality that they're facing, of 200,000 dead in the drug war, of the insecurity, of the levels of corruption that are totally unsustainable, than they are of what might be a certain amount of uncertainty with a new party and a new person. And that's a part of the reason why we're seeing
Let's talk about the string of assassinations of political candidates in the lead up to Sunday's presidential election. Over the last week, 2 mayoral candidates were assassinated in the state of Michoacan. Telesur reports at least 121 politicians have been murdered since September, making this election cycle the bloodiest in recent Mexican history. And then, if you could address what will this mean for the border, for the immigrants coming over the border, if López Obrador wins?
Well, first of all, in the violence, it's the highest level of violence that we've seen. You heard the numbers, just opened the paper today, another mayoral candidate in Oaxaca killed. And this is a kind of a wild card in the elections. We know it's clear that if they take out a candidate, and it's usually organized crime involved, oftentimes complicit with local authorities, if they take out a candidate, it's destroying your right to vote for that person. But there's also creating a chilling effect where there's high levels of violence and people may be afraid that the electoral process will be surrounded by violence and then not go out to vote. So this could have an impact in certain areas on democratic participation by keeping people away from the polls, perhaps especially in areas where there could be an opposition vote. That's hard to quantify, but it's very, very important.
We just have 20 seconds.
Okay, as far as the border, López Obrador is proposing a much stronger stance towards the Trump principles. He doesn't want the Trump lack of principles in immigration, the policies that are coming out. He doesn't want to confront him directly, but people are very hopeful that there will be a Mexican president who will stand up for Mexicans after this election, because they felt that the pre-government has taken a very weak position in order to renegotiate NAFTA and defend Mexican interests in what it views as the elite interests in the economic sphere.
Laura Carlson, I want to thank you very much for being with us, Director of the Mexico City-based America's Program for the Center for International Policy. Happy birthday, John Randolph. I'm Amy Goodman with Juan Gonzalez.